I think it's about time we should get started. I think we have the majority of the people who will be attending this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are. Hello everyone, my name is Jon Chase and this is a GlobalSCAPE Science Communication Practitioner Workshop. And this particular session is about justice, equity, diversity and inclusion in science communication. This is part one of two parts. The other part will be beginning in 4 hours from now, so 2 hours after the completion of this session. GlobalSCAPE is a consortium of 6 members as Trinity College Dublin, University of Leiden, the Excite European Network for Science Centres and Museums, SciDev.net, who deal with journalism and covering stories and research from the global south and the developing world, Qualia Analytics, and also Springer Nature. Just to remind everyone, in this session, it's mainly intended to be a means of bringing all of you folks together, science communicators, practitioners from diverse fields and backgrounds, into close contact with each other, and some of the research supporting the global field of science communication. In this workshop, we are all learners, and each participant is considered an expert in their own context. Just to let you know that there's a range of different experience levels here. Some people with less than a year's experience, some with more than 10 years experience of doing science communication and focusing on this type of work. But all of you are experts in basically living to the age you are now and experiencing your society, your particular region and context. So please do share your experiences with everyone else, because no one else knows them and would love to find them out or find out about them. So as such, we encourage you to ask questions of each other and also be willing to share your own perspectives as much as possible. This will help us all in reflecting upon our own practices alongside those of the global science communication community. So who am I? Well, I'm Jon Chase. I'm currently based at the University of Leiden, working on the GlobalSCAPE project. And previous to that, I've been a freelance science communicator for about 15 years now. I've done science communication work on television, that's the top left, and an actual game show, which was interesting, which was to an audience that weren't specifically interested in science. It was just me having an opportunity to communicate science on a national stage. And I've also done lots of stage shows and to many different sized groups and to different ages as well. And I've done educational programs. Here at the top right, you can see a series of programs available on the internet in the UK because it's through the BBC. And in the bottom right, that's just me doing a talk. I do many talks, I do a bit of training, but I just generally try and share science in as many opportunities and ways as I can. And I also have co-authored a few books, The Science of Star Wars, Science of Harry Potter, and The Science of Jurassic World. So this project, GlobalSCAPE, has been a 2-year project, and it's just coming to an end at the end of this month. We did a year-long diary study to look at science communicators' situations around the world. And our focus is to look at the lesser heard voices around the world who are not often spoken about in science communication research and practice, who are not heard from. And so we really wanted to know about the perspectives that we don't usually come into contact with. And hopefully you'll all get an opportunity to do that in this session by sharing with each other and learning from each other. If you'd like to know more about the project, you can check it out at global-scape.eu. So that's an introduction to me, but I'd like everyone to get to know each other a bit. So I'm going to ask a question of you all, and I would like you to put the answer in the chat, but don't press enter, just put it in the chat. And then when I press enter, I'd like everybody to press go at the same time, okay? Right, so I hope you are ready. So I'm going to ask you to think of any 3 words to describe you. And remember, don't press enter yet. We'll press enter at the same time, so all the answers come at the same time. So think of 3 words that describe you. as a person. Any 3 words you want. We're not looking for any right or wrong answers here. So if you think lemon describes you, put it in. If you think cloud describes you, put it in. Any 3 words that you feel describes you. Okay, I'll give you about 5 more seconds and then we'll press go and we'll see who we have in the room. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so we have mother, biomedical and nature, fantastic. Introvert, passionate and animal lover. Enthusiast, laughter, astronomy, yet laughter is a fine way to describe yourself. I love that. Curious, travel and books. Ocean lover, Scottish and mother. Affable, innovative, curious. We always get a few curious people, and it may be that everybody's actually curious. I don't know if I've ever met anyone that's not curious. We've done a whole thing in Leiden for a whole year of science communication to the public, and the main theme was curiosity and being curious. So what an awesome trait. Love, grace and joy. Reliable, creative, hike loving, yes. Resilient, Christian researcher. C, talkative, energetic. Talkative is going to come in really handy today because I hope we'll be able to share all of our ideas. We have storyteller, knowledge acquirer, and inclusive. That is perfect for this session. C, talkative, energetic, I said. Funny, relaxed, and cheerful. So I'm sure that'd be an amazing person to have around on most days, and especially if you're a researcher or depending on what you're doing to cheer up the moods in the day. Now, authentic, hilarious, and nerdy. Oh, I'd like to spend some time and get some of that joy and happiness and some laughter from your hilariosity. Creative, simple leader, excellent. Good morning from Mikel, so great, Ethiopia. Hello. Friendly, insecure, but talkative. Well, excellent. So remember, a reminder to everybody that you're all going to have to be 100% respectful of each other. And in that light, we can share and be free to share our ideas and thoughts. And I'm sure everyone here will be because you're in this particular session. Researcher, curious and resilient, excellent. Dynamic, friendly and talkative. Another talkative person, fantastic, so we can share some of those ideas. Dynamic, friendly and talkative, excellent. So we were just sharing 3 words that describe ourselves. So this is excellent. Researcher, curious and resilient. And who else have we got? We've got lovely, kind and reliable, and introspective, caring and brave. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And I'm hoping we can all be a little bit brave today when undertaking this workshop. So here's a quick overview of this workshop. So it's basically for all science communication practitioners. When we started out the GlobalSCAPE project, one of the remits was that it had to be suitable for as many different audiences as possible. The reason being is that these materials will be available as an open access resource, which means you can download the presentation in its raw form, as well as the workbook and also a facilitator's guide, a little guide to run in the workshop. And the hope is that you'll see some things of interest within this workshop that you feel that you can use and share with your own networks. Something that you may feel that you're prepared to take on, and maybe it's a single activity that you like, that you feel would be really transformative for your colleagues. Please do just download the resources, take whichever part you want, adapt it in whichever way you want, change the language, change the format, change the colors, change the references, make it you, make it your region, make it your context. And that is what we're hoping, is that everybody will have that opportunity to do so. So it's for all science communication practitioners from anywhere in the world. So just away from that. Okay. We want this workshop to be a reflection on how diversity, equity, and inclusion can be acknowledged and prioritized within our practices to promote justice for all global citizens. Why do we need this? Well, there are large differences in society's access and contribution to science across the world for many different complex reasons. To avoid continuing these imbalances, we need to use practices that acknowledge and support our diverse global communities. What is the goal of this workshop? Well, it's to increase diverse public's access to science in the broadest sense, by ensuring that equity and diversity are recognized as central considerations within science communication practice. By the end of this first session, you will understand what is meant by the terms equity and diversity, discuss the importance of prioritizing equity, diversity, and inclusion in science communication, explore issues related to diversity in science communication, and develop an audience profile for your science communication work. Now, before we continue, I'd like to run a little poll. And the main reason of this is that we all come from vastly different contexts, and we have a great difference in our levels of experience. So I think it would be good to just let everybody know that at the very beginning, so everyone can see how long we've been science communicators for, and also how long we've been centering issues of EDI in our work. So I've just launched the poll. Please do click in your answers. Let us know how long have you been involved in science communication is the first question. How long have you been active? And the second question is, how long have issues of EDI, that's equity, diversity, and inclusion, been an active part of your science communication work? Great, so I see a few responses coming in. Excellent. Fantastic. Oh, we see. And as expected, you've got a wide range of experience levels here. And that's really wonderful. And it means we can share knowledge from the people who have more experience to the people who have less experience in science communication. But not only that, again, it's not all about your experience in science communication. Although it will help you to share particular perspectives and ideas, we also want to know about who you are and what it's like to be you from your region. And even if you haven't done a lot of science communication events, I'm sure you've been to science communication events, and you can share your knowledge about that. So we've got almost all the answers now. So I'll give a few more seconds for anyone else to give their answers, just 5 more seconds if you want to respond to the poll. Don't worry if not, it's totally fine. Okay, so let's see who we have in the room. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. Okay, so that hopefully should be up on your screen. And you can see that when it comes to how long people have been active in science communication, about 15% have been less than a year. Altogether, under 6 years, totals about 47, 62. So more than half, about 6 out of 10 of you have less than 6 years experience. Then we have, and about half have less than 5 years. And that means about half have lost more than 5 years. So it's a dead split almost. But we've got about 19%, so 1 in 20 of you have more than 10 years experience. And so we have quite a few people in here with a lot of experience and a lot with not much experience. And the hope is we'll be able to share that experience with each other and rely on each other's perspectives and experience to work through some of the exercises and to understand some of this better. Now, how long have you been centering EDI in your work? When we look at that, we can see it's vastly different. We can see that there's a big skew towards the lower amounts of time. And if you look in the last 5 or 6 years, we can see that, okay, even in the last 2 years, we can see that almost 7 out of 10 of you, so 70% or 2/3, just over 2/3 of you have been doing it for less than 2 years. And when we look for less than 5 years, we can see, so I'll just let someone into the room. Here we go. We can see that for less than 5 or 6 years, we've actually got a number of about 96% of you, no, 92% of you. So the vast most of everyone has been doing this for less than 6 years. Now, why am I asking you this? Well, we'll find out about this a bit more in a couple of slides. So let's begin with you all getting to know each other. So I've got a little icebreaker here, and I'm going to split us into different rooms so we can get to know each other. So I'd like you all to introduce yourself and share why the 3 words given in the introduction relates to you. Then briefly share your thoughts on the importance of JEDI, reminder that's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I want to hear your thoughts on the importance of those within science communication and whether you intentionally target issues of JEDI in your practices. So I'm going to split you into breakout rooms. I'm going to do an even split. So there's about 35 people in the room. We are going to go into 8 rooms to have roughly 4 people in each room. So I may have to change around 1 or 2 rooms because my alter ego GlobalSCAPE will be in 1 room. So if you suddenly pop into another room, that's because there's 5 people in your room and I want to spread it out as evenly as possible. Well, actually, I think I can do that now. So there's no point me even saying that. So I'm going to change this person here to room 8. Fantastic. Okay, so the rooms are open. Please do join your room and share why you use those 3 words to describe yourself and how long you've been working on EDI and why you think it's important. Okay, we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Okay, hopefully everybody is back in the room now, and I hope you all managed to learn a bit from each other and find out a bit about each other's perspectives. Some may have been surprising, some maybe not so surprising, and maybe you had things in common, maybe you found there were vast differences. But that's what we're here to find out, about each other's perspectives and how our experiences are similar or different. So you all shared a bit about why you feel justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. From here on, I'll just mention it as JEDI. Why you feel that's important in science communication. Now, there is one key reason that I could think of, regardless of anything else, and that comes from something published by the United Nations about human rights. And in the United Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right freely to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. And that's everybody, whether they do science or not. And that's everyone around the world. And regardless of who they are, where they are, they have an actual right to share in scientific advancements and its benefits. And so in a way, the work we're doing as science communicators in sharing and engaging people with science is actually fulfilling people's right to access that information and that knowledge. So what other reasons might there be for focusing on JEDI? Well, there's many different answers you can find out there. For example, some of these you may find resonates with you. It might be that you yourself have some of these reasons, all of these reasons, or you never considered any of them. And again, it depends on how long you've been doing this type of work and your experience within the field of science communication, and your region, of course. So you may want to consider the impacts of science and science communication on all members of society. How are people affected? Is there anyone we're missing out from that picture? Do we feel that our perspective in our country is the same for everyone else? We want to see the impacts on all members of society. We want to center topics of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We don't want them to be on the peripheral, upon the outskirts. We want them to be the center of our considerations. To seek a more balanced representation in who produces and engages with science communication. We might also want to better serve communities. And that isn't just communities that we talk to or with, that is also communities of scientists. We want to serve both. It works both ways. We also would like to value the missing perspectives from diverse and marginalized communities, from the people we do not hear from. In particular, GlobalSCAPE wants to hear from the lesser heard voices. But we want to hear from everyone as much as possible, so everyone has a voice. To increase the social relevance of scientific findings, so to learn more about communities around the world, so when we do science and when science is done, we can relate it more to what's actually happening around the world, to different communities, and not just the people in particular countries, for example, the global north, or the richer countries, or the countries that get most attention. We want to cater for everybody as much as possible. We want to support and develop meaningful, open, and trustworthy relationships between science and societies, I should add. Not just society, but many different societies all over, depending on where we are. And finally, well, not finally, because the list can go on, we want to increase participation and sense of belonging in science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine. Now, these are just some reasons, and there are many more. And each of these that you see a number next to, there's a whole paper that addresses these ideas. And so these, as I said, these slides will be available afterwards, and you can just click on the links and it will take you straight to the website where you can read the paper yourself. There will also be resources, a list of resources that I'll provide in the pack as well. So, and if you'd like to know anyone in particular, before then, just let me know and I can find it and put it in the chat for you. Now, I wanted to ask what you think of the term JEDI, J-E-D-I. Just think to yourself, do you like it? Are you offended by it? Do you think it's useful? Have you never heard of the J part put in? Have you never seen or considered the justice aspect? Well, just to let you know that there are other acronyms that exist, and someone did mention it earlier in the chat about they use the A as well. So you could have DEI, for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DIB, where the B stands for belonging, or IDEA, where the A stands for access. And there are many different acronyms that you could use. Now, some have argued against JEDI due to its link to Star Wars, and that was an article in Scientific American. So if you're interested, you can also check that out and learn a bit more about why they thought it might not be a useful term to use. Now, the J does stand for justice. And it's a really important part. Many people haven't heard of it or considered it. And justice and diversity, for example, justice is quite an old issue, but diversity gains a lot of attention within the civil rights movements coming out of America in the 60s. And these issues became global in their nature as everyone started realizing rights that before then wasn't considered as such within their communities, within their societies. So people started looking across the globe and realizing that actually we shouldn't be putting up or standing up for this. And we find many different occasions where that happens. Okay, so I want to do a quick poll now, just to ask you a question. And this question is, which groups do you mainly focus on if or when focusing on issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion? And so I'm going to share a link in the chat for a poll. If you like to use QR codes, you can just use the QR code as well. And if we go to that website, you'll be able to answer the particular question. Which groups do you mainly focus on if or when embedding EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion within your work? So you should all be able to see this Menti cloud, and for the next 5 or 10 minutes, right through the break, I'll leave it open. So if you have any other ideas as we move on, please do feel free to enter them. So who are we focusing on in this room? And we can see the biggest words are the ones that most people focus on. And then the even sized words means there's roughly the similar types of responses. So you can see by and large, women are the main focus. There's one that I've never actually seen as a focus, men. I've never seen anyone put men as the focus. And it's really good to see because I'm a man, right? It's good to see that we're the focus in some work as well, because 50% of the world's population. But it works the other way, in that women are 50% of the world's population, and yet still for so long, they've been missed in so many dialogues. But I must add that this is not in every culture and community. Some cultures have always seen women as important and put them at the top. But in history and historically, especially in the last few hundred years, it has been women who have got the raw deal. So it's really good to see women represented, adults represented. We see children as well. And then we have many other groups: Africans, racial minority, previously disadvantaged, Portuguese speaking, health, low income, lay people, race, disability, migrants, less educated, highly educated, native, youth, disabled, urban slum communities, LGBTQ participants, IMICS. I've never heard of IMICS or LMICS. So please do let us know. And remember, this is a learning opportunity for all of us. So if there's something we're not aware of, we can just ask. And so I'd love to ask. Lower middle income countries. Thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, so that's great. Arabic speaking, sex workers, teachers, low SES. SES stands for social economic status. So that's the status you have based on your income within society and the wage bracket you're in. Low literacy, gender, transgender communities, people living with HIV, underprivileged, Ukrainian speaking, accessibility in general. So there are so many different groups, and NEETs as well. So I think that's not in education or training. I can't remember what the next E is for. Not in education, employment or training, I believe. Yeah. Okay, so we have many different groups that people focus on, and depending where you are in the world, some of these may be more prevalent for you. So you may have a higher proportion of people who are blind due to not being able to take relatively straightforward procedures in some countries. For example, in richer or Western countries, you might be able to get something locally just from going to the hospital and they'll do a treatment. But in some countries, you can't get it. So more people are blind. And so each country has their own unique sets of individuals and groups that are disadvantaged. And so bearing that in mind, it's just recognizing that we all are working from different perspectives. But I'll keep that open. But bear in mind, the most popular groups are women, children here, Africans, adults, visual impairment. Okay, so let's go back to the main presentation and let's make some comparisons. So I'd like to point out this piece of work here. Now, this is a paper by Judd and McKinnon, and they made a systematic map of inclusion, equity, and diversity in science communication research. Now, bearing in mind, this is mainly focused on research, but it still has parallels. We can still apply it to ideas based on the practice that we do. Some of you will be researchers specifically. Some of you will be science communication researchers. Some of you will be mainly practitioners or hoping to get into doing more practice. So they noticed that in the last few years, and the last 5 or 6 years, 63% of the papers published were in the last 5 years. Now, they looked at the last 40 years of publications in science communication, but specifically in the English language, because that's the language they spoke. And in these English language published research papers in science communication, 2/3 of them were published in the last 5 years. And so that means there's been a huge focus on EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion within the last 5 or 6 years. Now, if you recall our survey we done earlier, even though half of you had been practicing for less than 50 years and half of you for less than 5 years, and half of you were practicing for more than 5 years, when we looked at how long you've been focused on EDI work, it was 92% that had focused for less than 6 years. So 92% of you have been doing it within the last 5 years. And that kind of matches almost here to say that most people are now coming around to EDI. And so on a global level, we can expect that this will become more of an issue. And so being able to respond to these issues are of high importance. They also noticed a disproportionate focus on girls and women. And if you recall the Mentimeter, right in the middle of that was women and children. And so these are common themes around the world, is that generally this is what we focus on. And obviously we do focus on many different groups though. And it is to bear in mind that research often follows the practice. It's behind what we're actually doing in the world. Many people are doing lots of great and amazing things, and research only manages to get a handful of those, a tiny amount, and then research it. And so it's not an accurate representation of what is actually going on in practice, but it's good to understand that research about it, the lessons learned, have mostly been focused on women. Minoritized groups, e.g. those with disabilities or from different cultural backgrounds, appear largely overlooked in terms of research focus, but they do offer some ideas and recommendations. And I'm just going to share that paper in the chat in case any of you would like to learn about it further. So here we go. So you should have access to that paper now. But they give some reflections on some things that they think we could do. They say researchers should increase the diversity of their collaborators. Now, if you're a researcher yourself, consider that, please. And if you're a practitioner, you can also consider being more diverse in who you collaborate and work with. In multinational studies, local people should be part of the authoring team. And again, for practitioners, consider whether when you work in a place, do you work with local people? To what degree do you work with local people in that area? Are there any local science communicators? Why not? What can you do to change that? But that's something we can look at a bit later. They also say we need researcher and practitioner collaborations to develop an evidence base regarding inclusive science communication. Now, inclusive science communication is a movement within science communication, doing pretty much what it says, but it's an idea of inclusive science communication, and they've released a few papers about it, and they see it as an approach to science communication that centers issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So to get a bigger base of evidence, we need practitioners partnering up with researchers and collaborating to share what works and what doesn't work, so that we can share that with the rest of our communities, and so that we can really make an impact using evidence-based practices to really make a difference in the world around us. It is very nuanced. What works for one community might not work for another community, but we just don't know that. And so we need all of you who practice it to go out and try it. Look at the evidence, look at the research, see what's working, give it a go, try it out, and then report back to them, even informally. And hopefully they'd be able to partner with you to really get down to what is happening and how we can make a difference. Okay, they say an intersectional approach is necessary to be inclusive of the communities we serve. And that's just saying it's not a one-dimensional approach. It's an approach that overlaps, where we consider different dimensions of people and situations. But we'll talk about intersectional approaches later, and intersectionality. We'll also talk about inclusive science communication a bit later as well. So before we go to a break, I'd just like to introduce the concept of equity. Now, equity refers to a model of social justice that attempts to challenge and transform social inequalities and work towards more just power relations. Now, that is a definition from the Youth Equity and STEM team, which was a project in the UK. They have many resources available to look into the issues of equity more, and I'll share you a link to that shortly. Now, when it comes to equity, what does it mean? Well, to get a grip, to get an idea, let's start with the idea of inequality. So here we have two individuals, and you can see that one is just from where they're standing, one has a higher access to the bounty, the stuff that's growing on this tree, the apples. But we use this tree here as a metaphor for knowledge and science and access to science. Now, this image I've adapted from the University of Bath, who produced this image as part of their equity and diversity work. So inequality is unequal access to opportunities, unequal access to the apples. So we want to achieve equality. So equality means to treat people equally, doesn't it? So we'll give them both the same ladder, and by treating them equally, we'll achieve equality. Well, not really. It's not that simple. So equality could be evenly distributed tools and assistance. So we've distributed the tools in an equal way to both people, but we can see that it hasn't achieved an outcome of equality. We've used a process that has equality, so the process was equal, but we see that that hasn't resulted in an equal outcome. One kid or one person now has just more access to what they had before. The other one has more access to what they didn't have. So they're not really reaching the tree. They're still in trouble, whereas the other one has got even more plentiful opportunities. Just from the position they're in at the beginning affects how they are treated, how the outcome is. So equality treats everybody the same, regardless of their individual differences. However, we don't want just equality in how we treat people. We want equality as an outcome. And to do that, we need to recognize that people start in different positions. And then we need to give them what they need to become on an equal level with the other people. So equity gives custom tools that identify and address inequality. It makes adjustments for the individual. It doesn't give a blanket, a broad solution for everybody and say, here's everyone, here's the same solution. What it does is it focuses on individual differences and gives people precisely what they need to achieve equality. So equity acknowledges and responds to difference by treating people proportionately to their needs. It's about achieving equality, not necessarily about the process of equality. So we would use a process of equity that considers difference to achieve equality. So that's the key difference. Equality can be a process or it can be an outcome. And to do a process, we use equality. To get an outcome of equality, we need equity. We need to treat people based on what they need. Now, equity is important. It can also be linked to ideas of environmental justice to create more inclusive science communication. For example, in this paper by Poke and Diver, they say equity framing provides an essential point of access. So framing issues around equity provides an essential point of access for disadvantaged communities to engage with science communication, and also an important opportunity for researchers and science writers or science practitioners, science communication practitioners, to increase their accountability to disadvantaged communities. So we can make a difference and really become accountable and realize our accountability to these disadvantaged communities, whichever they may be around the world. And we can do that by recognizing equity as an approach. Equity as a way of recognizing their difference, giving them what they need, finding out what they need and providing that so we can achieve a state of equality. Now, you can spend a whole day learning about equity. You could spend a whole week doing courses on equity. So we're not going to try and delve too deeply into it, just present the initial idea. But if you'd like to explore equity further, please do consider checking out these wonderful resources from the Youth Equity in STEM team. I'll post them in a chat. There you'll find many different resources. They even got exercises to help you look at your own or your organization's degree or level of achieving equity within your area. Just click on the link, follow it up, look into it in your own time. And they even have access to a course that you can do online for free to help develop your own particular skills, knowledge, and equity. So we have got to 10 o'clock. Now it is time for a well-deserved break for all of you. So please do get away from your screens, get a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, whatever you need right now to help you deal with the next hour of the session. So please do relax. If you have any questions, please do feel free as always to go into the chat. I'll come back. I'm going to disappear to get myself a cup of tea or coffee, and then I'll be back. And if you have any questions whilst the break is happening, please do feel free to just go ahead and ask. I don't mind. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. We have a countdown. See you shortly. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is the second part of this, first session. And now we're going to look closer at diversity. Take a deep dive and explode the idea of what is diversity and how can we consider it. And then we're going to set up an audience profile. So a way to understand your audiences and to think about who it is you work with and don't work with. So let's consider diversity. So let's introduce one of our characters from earlier again. This is an individual and they have an identity. Their identity is based on various different characteristics. We use those characteristics to identify this person. One person, an individual. Now, if we were to extend this to more than one person, and we have two individuals with two sets of characteristics that are used to describe them. Now, I should bear in mind that when we have characteristics, there's the words that we would use to describe ourselves, and then there's the words that other people would use to describe us. And these are both ways of being identified. Sometimes we're identified by what others group us into, and sometimes we're identified by what we group ourselves into. And sometimes and often they don't match. There are overlaps, but it's all culturally determined, socially determined. There's many different angles to it. But in any case, there are particular characteristics of which we use to understand who we are and how we differ, how we're different. So there's two different individuals on the right. Now we've got more than one person. Now we can have diversity. You don't really have diversity with just one person. You've just got one set of traits, but on characteristics. But when you have more than one person, you have multiple sets and diversity exists. Now, I have a question for you, just to think about it in your mind, in your head. What is diverse about this group on the right? So there's an individual on the left, they're not diverse. On the right, they are diverse. Now, you're welcome to share any ideas in the chat if you have any, if you want to see, if you just wanted to say, oh, I think it's not, or if you think it's not that simple, do you think there are ways we can definitely say how they're diverse? So if you want, you can share it in the chat and I'll try and keep my eye open. So there are two people. So, you know, and that's saying quite a lot just in itself, saying anytime you've got two people, you will have diversity. The very fact of having two people, there's diversity. So I like that, simply enough. Diversity of thinking, fantastic. Their color, their race, absolutely. Okay, we've got a good comment here, which is, our perception of their diversity is all we can speak to since we don't understand their contexts. Well done, Johanna. So it's saying is that it's our perception that could be the issue. We're only talking about our version of their characteristics, not necessarily what actually is. We'd have to delve deeper to find that out. The color, the sex, can one and two people represent a real diversity? Well, two people, you can have diversity represented by two people, but you might not have much diversity, or you might do. And these are the things I want to explore. And I think hopefully as we reveal more ideas now, you'll be able to answer some of that question for yourself, or maybe even have more questions as a result. Now, looking at these two individuals, when I first put it up and reflected again on it, it made me start thinking more. Two people can clash already, absolutely. So let's think about these two people. First thing I realized, my biggest assumptions. I thought they were 2 boys at first. Then I realized they might not be boys, they might be girls. They could be 2 girls. They dress how they want. Do you have to dress a certain way to be a boy or a girl? Another thing I realized I had an assumption of, they might not be considering themselves as a boy or a girl. They might not be binary in that way. They may be anything. And so I don't know if I can really assume I know exactly what that is. And I can't say what it is without finding out, asking them, or getting more information. What else did I notice? Well, are they actually children? Are they actually youngsters? There are people who are older that have afflictions that cause them to appear to look extremely young. They have particular disabilities that mean they do not look as old as you'd expect them to. And so they could be suffering from that as well, or going through that. I don't want to say the term suffering, but they might be have that particular disability. And so maybe they're not children at all. Okay, all right, maybe I can say some other things. They're different from different ethnicities, different racial groups. Now, here's another assumption. I see blonde hair, blonde straight hair, and I assume that maybe this child is Caucasian. But actually, when I go to Australia and I look at indigenous cultures there, I see some of those children are blonde with straight hair, and they have dark skin. But this kid doesn't have dark skin. Oh no, but some people are albino and they have fair skin. And so if I'm actually looking at a child here who's an albino, but born and bred in the exact same place as the child to the right, or the adult to the right, actually they're from the same ethnic group. So really, I'm taking all these things literally at face value, and I really can't know until I ask them, delve deeper into the situation. So my lesson from that is we should always be aware of our own assumptions and be aware that what we think might not be what is. And the identity that we impose on people, that we fit them into, might not be the identity that they actually have. And so we always need to be wary of that. When we speak about diversity, also we cannot think of it as one thing. We cannot just say they're diverse because of their ethnicity, or because of their gender, or because of their age. This is not what makes a person. It is not a single dimension. People are a mix of all of those things. Each person is at the middle of where all of these things cross over. So they have a particular age characteristic, gender characteristic, ethnicity characteristic, and many other different characteristics that add up. And each one affects them in different ways. So we can talk about power. So some ethnic groups have more power in their environment than others. They are more privileged. Just because of their ethnicity, they have more ability to make decisions, to control decisions that are made. They have better access to things. They are more advantaged just because of their agenda or their gender. So typically around the world, men have more power than women because they make more decisions. They get the better jobs. They get listened to more. Age groups, typically middle-aged people are more regarded and listened to. The younger audiences generally aren't listened to. Hey, they're just kids. And the older generations are often missed out. So once you get beyond a certain age, depending on your culture, people stop listening to you as much as the other people who are more dominant in society. Now, some cultures do respect their elders and put them as a highly important part of their societies and listen to them as the most important authorities. But the point is, across the world, these change. So we have different powers and advantages based on our characteristics. And each of us is not determined by one characteristic, but where our characteristics overlap to make us uniquely us, to build our unique identity. Now, the idea of these things are overlapping or intersecting to create different opportunities for us based on the specific ways they overlap is an idea of intersectionality. To say that sometimes it's not just because of our ethnicity where we have a problem, we might have another problem based on our gender as well. Or we might be in an ethnic group that is considered as having power, but we're in a gender that isn't considered as having power. For example, you might be a white woman, so white would be considered as power, but woman would be seen as not having the power, and it would perceive as a white man as having a better roll of the dice, better, more advantages in society. But what happens if you were a Black male? So you're still a male, you're considered as having an advantage, but because you're Black, you're having disadvantages. So we all have these an intersection of characteristics that uniquely affect how we can get on in society. Now, there are different cultural differences. If we look at a definition of cultural diversity, we can see that it's differences in values, beliefs, and behaviors defined by these different characteristics of nationality, ethnicity, gender, etc. These different characteristics can lead to differences in values, beliefs, and behaviors. And in science communication and the science of science communication, we try to look at commonalities between these. So what is it about ethnicity that we can target? Do particular ethnic groups need a particular approach? Well, we've just looked at intersectionality and we realized that we can't just go to an ethnic group and use one size that will fit all, because with each ethnic group, we have different genders, different ages. So we have to look at how these characteristics intersect to really cater for differences in populations and people. And so we're just mainly looking for identifiable patterns, anything that makes any sense for giving us an idea of how we should respond to a particular nationality group. But we always have to remember that that will not be the be all and end all, which is why it's always so very complicated to reach people specifically. Another thing to bear in mind is that many of these traits are not visible. We can see some stuff and say, we think that person's this, and again, beware of our assumptions, but many of these traits are actually invisible. Most of them are. So to find out, you need to ask questions, you need to do surveys, you need to get to know people. It's not just about looking and making a face value judgment. Now, speaking about face value judgments, we have to be aware that when we have diversity, differences amongst people, that this can lead to biases that we have because we're just not as familiar with those particular characteristics they have. People can have blatant or explicit biases that they are conscious of and they're very loud and vocal about. So they might say, oh, people from that culture are lazy, or people of that gender are always this, or they're always so emotional, or they never care about anyone. We have all these biases. Now, some are obvious and they're more blatant and we recognize them. Some of them are more subtle. They're called implicit biases. And these are unconscious. We're not aware that we're having these biases towards or against people, but they exist under the levels, and they cause us to act favorably or less favorably towards people. One such bias is called dissimilarity bias, where people seen as more similar to a person, or known as an in-group, are perceived more favorably than those that are less similar, known as an out-group. And in this situation, when you look at someone and if you feel you have something in common with them, you'll view them slightly more favorably. I'll give you an example. I've just had a baby. That lady's just had a baby. I feel we have something in common. Before you were both having a baby, you might have hated that person if you met them, but now you have something in common. Here's another one. Oh, that person supports the same football team as me. Okay. Maybe they're not so bad after all. Or that person comes from the same community, is the same gender, is the same height. We know what it means to be tall, don't we? Well, this similarity means you can view people more favorably, but it also means that if they're dissimilar, if you've got differences, you might not view them as favorably. And this can be really subtle. You might not think you're doing it, but this is an implicit, unconscious bias that we can have. And please remember that these biases work both ways. So as a presenter talking to a particular audience around the world, they will have views of you based on how you look, that will create biases. And similarity bias is just one, but there are so many others that you can find out about. Also, bearing in mind that you will have the same views and biases about your audience. Well, not the same ones as them, but there will be things that you might not realize you're having a bias about. And so when you're dealing with that audience, they will come out unconsciously. Now, the important thing to remember in this work is that we can't be aware of everything. And the important thing is that we're prepared to try and work towards it. And so don't worry sometimes that you may have said the wrong thing. Be conscious of it, recognize it, apologize if you've made a mistake, find out what the best term to use is. Always be prepared to ask people about their situation. Sorry, how would you prefer to be named? How would you prefer me to call you? What would you prefer me to say? Oh, sorry, I'm not sure. I don't want to make an assumption. So be prepared to ask people about themselves. Now, this isn't always practical. Sometimes you're put in front of a group of people, but then building up a sensitivity in the weeks, the months, the years, throughout your whole life means that you can act in a way that deals with diversity in more constructive ways. So bias can lead to prejudice for or against people of particular groups, as well as stereotypes and discrimination. So we just have to try and be aware of that. And it's also important to know that in some countries, discrimination is against the law. Like in the UK, there are particular protected characteristics, as they're called, that if you discriminate against them, it is literally against the law. For example, age, gender reassignment, being married during a civil partnership, being pregnant or on maternity leave. So each of your own countries will have their different laws, and some may not have laws against it, some will. So there's also an idea of levels of cultural diversity. And I got this idea from a paper by Feist, 2010. I can give you a link if you'd like. But most of the paper, this is only one tiny part of the paper, and it talks about many issues in it. But when they spoke of levels of cultural diversity, I thought this is really cool and something I should absolutely mention. You can have cultural diversity on a society level, where society and policy acknowledges, respects, and incorporates the varied characteristics of multiple cultures or cultural pluralism. And that means that within any society, does your society as a whole recognize that there are different diverse characteristics and cultures within it? Does it then reflect that in its policies to make sure that it doesn't exclude anyone or marginalize anyone through its laws and policies that do not include their perspectives? So when you're in a society where it's in the law, like the last description about the protected characteristics, that implies that not only do individuals acknowledge cultural difference, it means the government and the society as a whole has made it a thing to say, we recognize we're composed of many different cultures. And that recognition is important because it means people do not get marginalized. And you will always have some communities who are marginalized, who have yet to be brought into the recognition of the policies. But these are things that we can help change by recognizing these communities and bringing their voices to a wider level. There's also organizational diversity, where organizations embed practices and routines that are considerate of diverse cultural characteristics. For example, a characteristic of a particular disability. Does your company, does your organization get rid of all stairs and make sure they've got ways to enter rooms that don't just involve stairs? Do they put the effort in to make those changes? Does the organization make sure they respect different cultures, different religions, different sexes, different, and not just binary, but in between? And the thing is, we can't cater for everything, but starting to recognize these differences in communities and societies and groups means that we can start trying to incorporate their perspectives into our routines and practices. So that's an organizational level. The author near the paper, it's Feist 2010. I can provide a link to it if you can't find it. Put in Feist 2010 cultural diversity, but I'll put in an actual link. Okay, and finally, there is individual diversity. Now, before I mentioned, you can't have diversity with just one person, but actually there is a way of considering diversity within an individual. It's when individuals are considerate of or responsive to diverse cultural characteristics. How does that work? So me as an individual, I speak English. If I go into a room and recognize that 90% of the people in that room speak Spanish, then I have an option. Do I keep doing exactly what I always do, or do I try to diversify my approach? So I normally speak pretty quick, but because I'm speaking to people from vastly different backgrounds, places in the world, and uses of language as their first language, so not everyone has English as their mother tongue, what I have to do is I need to slow down, make sure I speak more clearly, so anyone who doesn't speak English as a first language can really have a chance to understand me. So I'm trying to be more diverse in my characteristics, not just he's a person that speaks fast. I'm a person that speaks at a good level. I think it is that paper, Diogo, so thank you very much. So other ways of being diverse as an individual is you might realize that I'm always dealing with people from a particular group. I'm going to spend the next few weeks or months really meeting people from that community, getting to know them so I can understand their norms, what they're into, so I can be more diverse in responding to their unique characteristics. So as individuals, we can do this in many different ways. And we can try to adopt behaviors that represent or acknowledge different characteristics of people in our societies. So that's individual diversity. Now, another paper by 2020 noted that as diversity increases, people start to perceive social groups as more similar. So they stop focusing on the vast differences, and the stereotypes stop being so spread. They tend to become more closed, and they start to see people within more like similar and more similarities between them, rather than noticing all the differences and pointing out differences in stereotypes. So that's an interesting paper again, an interesting study into the effect of diversity and living in diverse regions and cultures, and why diversity can be useful and important. Again, if you want any particular links to these, I can find them and put them in the chat, but they will all be available afterwards, because papers can take a bit of a time to read through. And if English isn't your first language, I don't want to throw you something and say, I recommend to read this. I would say there's other ways you can find out about these things. And this is just one point out of a huge paper, which may not be as relevant to you other than this one point. So, but if you like the information, I can give it to you. Okay, so we live in a diverse world, and we're about to make some profiles between us. We're going to make audience profiles, but I just want to let you know how we can kind of analyze, measure, or get an idea of the real diversity around us. So I spoke about characteristics, but how do we categorize these characteristics? So we live in a diverse world composed of the public. When we speak about the public, we could say, in general, the whole world represents the public, a mass of the public. But more specifically, we know it's not people with all the same characteristics. They're all unique as individuals. So we have many different publics, and many of them have traits, characteristics that overlap, things that they have in common. For example, many of them have that they're a female in common, and the rest have that they're male in common. And then there's many different categories we could divide it up. Oh, we're the same age, we're the same ethnic group, we come from the same country, the same latitude. So what we're doing is, we're really, when we're describing particular publics, we're putting a frame around the whole range of publics out there. And when we put this frame around them, we're doing that to focus on a particular group so that we can try and include them more, or understand them more, or target them specifically. Good science communication, the best science communication, really tailors its approaches to particular audiences based on their likes and dislikes. But in reality, it's not like that. We do not get a perfect frame. There are gaps where we set out our frame and people beyond that frame sneak into the room. We might have a room where we thought we'd just work towards the elderly, but you'll get a few younger people who come in, and that's fine. Also, you'll get people who slip out of that frame that you try to target, but then it's a bit more fluid. So people coming in and out of that frame. Remember, any definition is really a category that we make up. In reality, it's more fluid. It's not categories, it's all of them combined. So how could what types of different ways could we look at this frame? So we could look at geographic frames, geographic regions. What country are they from? Are they from mountainous regions? Are they from the coast? Are they from the country? Are they from rural populations? So we can look at geographic aspects. Do they live near rivers, near the coast, in the desert, in the jungle, forest? Now, these are known as audience segments, and it comes from marketing, where to understand who they're going to try and sell their products to, they divide up. So that's just my daughter barging in, which is fine. So they divide up their publics into segments. These segments, they use to try and understand them better, and they develop these segments called segmentation analysis to get a better idea of cultures and communities and people we work with. So not only do we have geographic groupings, we've got socio-demographic groupings based on the structure of cultures, which is the classic gender, age, sex, what they look like. Then we also have behavioral characteristics. So that's how they behave, how they act, the types of things they have in common. Do they all tend to do the same things? Then we have psychographic, which is, do they all think the same? Do they support science? Are they against science? What is their mode of thinking like? So we can use any of these groups to try and understand the characteristics of societies and populations. Now, another 3 words to notice is that some of these groups might not be in the majority. So when we look at them, there will always be some that aren't most represented. We call those the minorities. Now, being a minority does not mean you're worst off. It just means you're not as represented in numbers. Because, for example, you can have a minority of 2 men and 58 women working in a country, the women in a company. The women are the majority, yet still, the men, because of the situation of power, they might be the ones who become the leaders or the bosses, the managers, or the ones that get paid the most money. So minority doesn't mean you're less privileged. Minority just means there's less of you. But it doesn't mean the idea of minority is not important. What else is there? We also have the idea of marginalized. So marginalized are people who are put to the outskirts. Sorry. Marginalized are people who are pushed out from the conversation. They are not centralized in the room. They are put out to the edges. They are marginalized. And their views are not regarded as strongly as everyone else's. And there's so many difficulties. They basically face disadvantage because they're marginalized to the edges. Then we also have underserved. So underserved are really the people who are not receiving as much attention as they should. And so they're not receiving their fair share as everybody else. And so we recognize those as underserved communities. Okay, so now it's over to you. Now I'd like you to think about the characteristics of people around you. Now we're going to spend about 10 minutes on this. But again, I must point out, this is a short workshop. Time flies. Because of Zoom and the limitations, we don't want to get Zoom fatigue. We try to limit the length of our meetings to only a few hours. So even though this starts here, this is just to get a rough idea of the concepts and what we're trying to put across here. But this is something I believe you should work on for longer. If you've got time after this session, please do spend some more time on it. But in the coming days, in the coming weeks, even in the coming months and years, this, I believe, is something you should always go back to. Now, I did send out a workbook, and so you have got an opportunity to just download that workbook and look at it and work through it yourself. But don't worry if you haven't. All you need is a pen and paper for this. And with that pen and paper, the first thing that I'd like you to do is write down your own profile. So write down who you are and write down your characteristics. Now, I am going to share it here so you can see. So don't worry if you haven't got it, it will come up there now. But what you'll be doing is in this exercise is you'll be writing down who is in the room when you communicate science. Who do you typically see? So write down all the characteristics. So, oh, I always, and when I do stuff, it's generally this age, or it might be a mix of ages, but write down, say, ages, this to this, genders, mainly male, mainly female, or good mix, 50-50, whatever. Disabilities, oh, I don't see much people with disabilities. They might be having hidden disabilities, but you just write down everything you definitely know you see. And you write that down there. And you can add behaviors, you can even write psychographic differences, but only write about what you feel you know. And it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, it's based on what you feel, okay? Just your initial glance. Then after you've done that, just spend like 3 or 4 minutes just quickly writing down as much as you can. Then spend about 3 or 4 minutes thinking, who are the people that I don't actually see? So look at the characteristics and think, oh, so based on that, that means we're not reaching these people. I'm not seeing any of these groups. Now, a way to do this when you've got more time is to go onto Wikipedia for the demographics section and just quickly write in demographics and then put your name of your country. And you'll find on Wikipedia, often they've got the results of a national survey that's looked at the demographics in your country. And you can see who are the communities that are common and groups that are common within your region. And then look at your list of who's in the room and then think, wow, okay, I do not see this group or this group. Then add that to the list of people that are not in the room. And then after that, I'd like you to think about, how you could reach some of these groups that are not in the room. Okay, so please do just get started. Start writing down your ideas. I would say for 2 minutes, start off by writing down what is your personal profile, because it might help you to start thinking about it in the right way, but you don't need to. But start by writing down what is my profile. And what might be interesting afterwards is to look at whether your profile matches the people that are in your room. So are you communicating with people that are similar or not similar? And that can have its own effects. So please do, in the meantime, just write down how diverse are the people in your room. Write down your own profile and then think about who's present, who's not present, and how you could reach those that are not present. You'll be looking at the 4 groups. You don't have to cover every single item. And here is an example of different things you could consider. What country do they come from? Are they from the Northern Hemisphere, from the South? What latitude, for example, are they near the equator where the weather's generally hot? Or are they at the poles where it's really cold? Are they urban? Are they rural? Just use whichever ones here that feel relevant to your audiences. And please don't just listen to me and then right after. Please do go ahead. I'm going to keep seeding ideas in the background, and then I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes to let you just think. But on demographics, are there any ages, any races, any sexual orientations, any particular qualification levels? Go ahead and put those in however you feel. I will put a link to a WhatsApp group in the chat. You may already be part of the Global Relevance one. There's a JEDI one as well, but they're part of all the Global SciComm network to communicate. So you can join any of them once you're in. So there's also socio-economic status, which is based on how much money you earn and the job you have, and also marital status, for example. So I'm hearing a lot of noise happening in my house right now, and I'm getting a bit distracted. So I'm going to go ahead and share the links, and I'm going to stop talking now and let you get on with this exercise. So we'll just spend about 5 minutes on this. But remember, this is something I would advise you continue every time you do an event. Come back to this list and think, who was in the room, who wasn't in the room. So I'm going to share that with you now and stop talking. So what you were doing is you were looking at different groups. Now, remember, these categories are only for purposes of classification. In reality, diversity is a lot more dynamic than any particular group, as we've seen. It's complicated. So what I ask you to do there is to identify who's in the room when you communicate. What different characteristics are there? I think someone asked about internet access. We all here have internet access, but to different degrees. Some people's internet access is intermittent, so we can't assume that it's fluid and clear and easy to use. And many parts of the world do not have internet access. And I just recently saw there was a statistic about how many million children do not have access to the internet. So, for example, yes, 2.2 billion, or 2 in 3 children and young people aged 25 years or less do not have internet access at home. So that's 2.2 billion, 2 in 3 children, and people under the age of 25. They don't have it in their homes, so they may have to go to a center, to work, to a community center, to a friend's house. And so internet access for us might be a thing, but for the communities we try to work with, it's definitely not an even picture. Okay, so we've seen that there are people in the room, and we've seen that there are people that are not in the room. Now, in the second part, and I will admit, the second part of the session is the hardest part of it all. It's where you really have to think hard about solutions, and I'm deliberately and I'm purposefully making it something where you have to think hard about it to take you out of your normal place you would think, the normal comfort zone. And in previous sessions, I found it is extremely difficult for some, and I apologize if you find that, but I've been adapting it to make it as easy as possible. But we'll address that when we come back in a few hours. But for now, I want to give you and leave you with a few recommendations. So in the last column that you'll see in the workbook, or the last thing I asked you to write down, would be, after you know what the profile of the people that are typically in the room is, then you've looked at some of the characteristics that are not present in the room. Then you think, how do I target or reach the people that are not in the room so we can be more inclusive and increase access? Now, these are the people who are underserved. The fact that you don't see them means whatever you're doing is not serving those characteristics or communities or groups. They are underserved groups. They are minorities in your room, and they might be there because they were marginalized, or, and that could be for many reasons, for example, because nothing was ever provided in a way that had meaning to them, and many different complex reasons. But it doesn't stop the fact that they were underserved. So how could you reach some of these underserved audiences? Well, there's this paper by Hum and Strogel. They looked at about 4 or 5 different research, pieces of research that were done, and they kind of looked at the commonalities between them. Then they applied some of their ideas that they developed to find out how you can practically reach underserved audiences. So I'll run through them quickly now. I'll do them a bit quickly first, so you all get a chance to hear them. Then I'll spend a bit of time and go 5 minutes over time, so apologies if you need to go. But it's start with listening, be responsive, and meet people on their terms. Reduce the distance and be accessible. Use language common to your audience. Be relevant for everyday life. Bring theoretical and ideas into practical things that they can grasp. Go where the people are and to where they prefer to be. Cooperation is key with local stakeholders or target group members. Mind the openness paradox. A basic agenda can provide direction for participants to engage. If you don't have a basic agenda for them to follow, then it becomes too open and they can get lost. And then implement long-term activities, not just quick activities that finish in a week or a month, or something that's short-term where they don't know where to go next. Try to make the activities long-term in whichever way you can. And there's many ways you could approach this, but one recommendation is, if local groups start the projects, then that favors longevity. So if the local groups are starting the projects, they're involved in the creation, the idea formation, how to make it run and how to do it. When you leave those groups and communities, they can continue it without your presence and funding. So when it says start with listening, be responsive and meet people on their terms, what that means is, don't assume you have all the answers for them. Don't assume that you are going into those communities or groups because they need access and you're going to give it to them. Oh, you're marginalized, you know, you should be here. Oh, poor you. No, we have to start with listening. Listen to what their actual needs are. What do they want? What do they not want? Do they actually want to be communicated about science, or do they just want to feed their families? Do they just want to have an opportunity to find a job and work? And you're trying to stuff information down their throats? No, start with listening. Be sensitive to what these different groups and communities need. And as a second to that, if you're not just listening, as in sitting in the room and hearing what people have to say, start with a question and then continue with listening. Ask a question, ask them how they'd like to be treated, how they'd like to be involved or included. And then be responsive to what they say and meet them on their terms. How do they like to be communicated with? Where do they like to be communicated with? What type of information are they interested in? Number 2, reduce the distance and be accessible. Use language common to the audience. If you can speak more than one language, then use a language that resonates with the audience. And if you don't know, maybe find someone who can speak your language and their language. Ask them if they'd be prepared to translate. Or ask them to translate beforehand, or even help them to run a session where they run the session and you help them on the side. But reduce the distance and be accessible. It's not just about the language as in the mother tongue. It's also about how big are your words? Is it jargon? Is it not? What's their educational level? Do they have a wide vocabulary or a more limited vocabulary? So being sensitive to these things can help be inclusive of the audience and reach underserved audiences. Be relevant for their everyday life. It's a pretty straightforward concept. If people live near the coast and they deal with marine life all the time and they're farmers, for example, or fishing village, talking about space and astronomy might not be the most relevant thing for these people, unless you can find a way to link it to their everyday activities. So be wary of the information you're trying to give to people and try to make sure it's relevant to their everyday lives. And even when it is relevant, try not to just speak of the theory, try to implement why it's useful in their practice. Now, this might not always be possible, but it's about recognizing whether your audience are people who can take the theory and put it into practice themselves, or whether it's something you have to help them do. You need to go where people are. So don't expect people to come to your museum in the middle of the city and expect that will reach rural communities. And don't think just because you've put on an exhibition about rural society, that rural communities will now magically be able to reach your museum. Be prepared to find a way to take your museum to them. You might not have an answer. You might not think it's possible. There are people around the world who are trying out these solutions. And so hopefully within this community, if you find you have a situation that you can't solve, by reaching out to your fellow members of this community within this network of people doing these workshops and more that we can bring in, you'll be able to ask them, does anyone have good methods for doing outreach from a museum? Then you'll find the people who said they put some exhibits on a bike. They reproduce exhibits and put it on a bike and ride out to rural communities. You can find that they say we print it all out and we go in and we deliver it in this way. And they'll provide ideas that you may not have thought of. So go to people where people are or to where they prefer to be. Cooperation is key. So cooperate with local people, local stakeholders, local groups, or target group members. So if you want to work with a particular community, cooperate with that community and speak to them and ask them how you can help them and how they would best be worked with. Would they like to work with you in producing something for their community? Because often there's people in their community who really want to find solutions, but they don't have the means or the necessary knowledge to implement them. That's where you can come in. And this brings me to the next point. Mind the openness paradox. So in this piece of research, they realized that they set up a project where they wanted people to participate and get involved. And they said, we want them to be leading this. And so we've brought these resources, but we want them to lead the charge and them to set up this project looking into this area. And they realized it didn't work. The reason being is that the people had no experience with implementing projects. Like, you can give us the materials, but we don't know what to do with them. Like, you can provide someone with a hammer to knock in some nails, but if they don't know how to use the hammer, what use is that tool? Now, I used a very basic example there, but it could be anything. You know, we gave 100 computers to this group, but they don't know how to use them, so they're going to waste. There was another example, pretty interesting, of where solar panels were bought for communities where there was plenty of sun, and they said, we'll provide everyone with electricity. And that is seen as an imbalance in societies, and to try and balance the equality of who has access to electricity, they provided solar panels to members of the community. And when they came back within the year later, they realized that a third or a half, I can't remember the number, weren't there anymore. And they were shocked. They thought, but we got these to really help you. But the problem is they didn't listen to the communities. They didn't really go in and ask them what they needed, because those communities were able to make more money by selling the solar panels to feed their families, because that was their key concern. They'd survived generations without electricity, but food is a big issue. So when we think about solutions, we can provide all these answers, but we need people to have adequate means and infrastructure to know how to use them and to actually be able to value them and for them to be of value to them. So mind the openness paradox. Have a basic agenda that can provide direction for participants to engage. And last one was implement long-term activities. Don't let it be something that a community does and then when you leave, they're left to what they were doing before, because things often require sustained input. And if you were the person driving it, when you leave, it's just going to run out of puff. To get over that, make sure local groups are embedded from the start and that they're involved with the commencement, the beginning of the project. Because if they feel they have begun the project, they were there from the beginning and the planning stage, then they have a better idea of what was needed. You've now given them more insight into how this activity works. And as they work on it, you're not driving it. You're just standing on the side and assisting them to push it. You're helping, you're giving the resources, the guidance, you're helping people where they're not sure. And then eventually, when your funding runs out and you need to leave, whether you're leaving the country, the community, or just leaving a project, the local groups can continue them in ways that work for them. Okay, so that is the end of the session. That is everything. I see a lot of you sharing your things on LinkedIn. I will be sharing the slides. Everything will be shared afterwards. As I said, will be all available as an open access resource. So after these sessions, what I'm doing is going back and tweaking anything that doesn't work. So that will be with your help and responses and reflections. And be providing you with the final piece that works best for our experiences. But you will be able to adapt these any way you want. You'll also have the workbooks, which I've sent. These workbooks will be adapted. As I've done this more, I've realized things that I should change. So you will get the final workbooks as well afterwards, all in a nice package, and a facilitator's guide. So if you would like to repeat this to your own communities or to your work groups, you can actually take any part of these workshops and deliver them. And you'll have a quick facilitator's guide just to give you some quick guidance and notes on what you might want to consider when doing that. Okay, so just to recap, we've learned that there are many reasons to focus on JEDI and SciComm. Sharing in scientific advancement and its benefits is a human right, is one main example. Equality and equity are not the same. Equality focuses on similarity, whereas equity focuses on difference. Equity is the preferred process for achieving an outcome of equality for all. Finally, diversity is really complicated. There are many forms of diversity which intersect in unique ways. Some groups remain marginalized or underserved by science communication, and we can help to try and balance that. So thank you so much, everybody. I did put the WhatsApp group in the chat. Do find everybody else on LinkedIn, but in the same way, if you join the WhatsApp group, you do have access to everybody else, and then you can literally put your LinkedIn chat there, because once I close this room, all of this will disappear. So quickly go through and grab anyone you want, or grab the WhatsApp link, which is here again. Please do follow it so you can follow each other, and you can find out the other 100 or so people from the other sessions that went on. So thank you for attending, and I'll see you in just under 2 hours, hopefully, to look into inclusion and look into justice a bit. So good luck. Have a good break. I'll stay around for 3 more minutes, maybe 3 more minutes, if anyone had any pressing concerns or questions. So please do just let me know if you do. But if not, bye.